Oh,
Hi James, how you doing?
not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, doing not too bad. Bit tired, but getting there.
Yeah.
How's things this morning?
Aye, not too bad. Not too bad. Just nothing much to do today. Horrible day outside, but got a few days left of my summer holiday, so just enjoying that.
I might as well enjoy it with an early morning Sunday Sunday calling.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you would be willing to introduce yourself to the audience that are tuning in at the moment. Just give a wee bit of background info to yourself and how you sort of got involved with your support of the TIE campaign, if that's all right.
Aye. So now I am a journalist and a college lecturer. Before that, I was a secondary school teacher. Um, I taught over in the Isle of Arran, and I came back to Glasgow in 2014, just after the independence referendum, and obviously sort of in around there, not long after that, the TIE campaign appeared. And I think the thing that struck me about the TIE campaign when I first saw it was how much it was making teachers like myself really, really think about the sort of education they were delivering. Because it's maybe not so difficult to kind of lodge something that captures kind of general interest and that becomes a really good campaign vehicle, which is what TIE is. It's arguably the most successful campaign vehicle we've seen in Scotland for years. But I remember talking to some teachers when it first appeared, and I remember some of the conversations that started to happen in the profession because of TIE. And I think that is maybe sometimes underestimated, like the impact that they had in that regard. So as a consequence, I've sort of from day one, since the first day I saw about it, I've been happy to support TIE however I could. What they're doing is absolutely vital, like completely crucial. So anything at all that will help, get them towards their goal is something I'd be happy to do. Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, we had John Naples Campbell speaking to us
Ah, cool.
yesterday, and he was talking about a sort of train the trainer approach, in the way that by he says that there's 300 teachers that have been taken through the sort of TIE workshop piece, and the fact that they're almost now equipped to go and have those conversations within their own faculties, within their own departments, and then within their own schools is just incredible. The potential for it is massive. So in terms of as a college lecturer, um, you know, and I don't we don't actually know all that much about how the workshops are laid out. I was wondering if maybe you could talk us through the sort of gist of what a Thai workshop to train the teachers looks like, if that's okay.
Sadly, I've not had a chance to be in any of their
Ah,
work.
okay.
You need John or somebody for that. My understanding of that, I've been spoken to Jordan and other people involved, including actually a couple of friends of mine who are teachers who've been through the training, is that an awful lot of it was, or certainly a good section of it was about getting them to really think about the importance of like visibility.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that really struck me, and that's really kind of affected the way I see things over the last few years. So I'm an English teacher, an English lecturer now,
Yep.
and one of the great things about English is that you can, in Scotland, and really there's no set curriculum. Particularly, there's not, with a very small exception in the hires. There aren't really like set texts. It's not like in other countries where, like, when you're in second year you have to have done these Shakespeare plays, etc., etc., etc. It really is up to English teachers to do, cover whatever material they want to cover, whatever literature they think will tie in with what they're trying to teach, and that's brilliant. That's a huge amount of freedom. One of the things that I think is important that's come out of the TIE campaign is having people in a very privileged position like mine, a teacher and one with all that control, to really think about the stuff that we're teaching people. So to look back, I mean, I started kind of looking back, like, to when I was at school, trying to think if I would ever have seen a single piece of literature, anything at all, really, that would have had characters in them who'd have been LGBT and it might have been the case, but I certainly don't remember any. And then I started looking at the stuff that I'd been teaching since I went into education. And again, to be brutally honest with myself, with the exception of one or two texts that might have been brought in, like the famous one is Strawberries by Eddie Morgan, there wasn't really a great deal of LGBT representation or visibility in my teaching either. So despite the fact that I would have been teaching stuff where I was very, very keen for my students to really understand like the world as it really is, and I would always be happy to talk to them about anything they wanted to talk about, when you see something like TIE and it makes you actually really, really think about your own practice and what you're doing with other young people, quite difficult sometimes to kind of look at your own work and kind of see how you're falling short, I suppose. But having seen that, then the goal then becomes to try and address that and try and fix it. And that, for me, it's been interesting, because it's not just in terms of like LGBT visibility in education, but I think lots of other groups, lots of other minority groups that again don't really get represented in what you would regard as like in sort of mainstream kind of way in education. Partly because obviously teachers need to deal with teenagers and doing stuff like that. Worry about it because how are they going to react? Is it just going to lead to this impossible class? But I think it's good that that's been challenged, and I don't think we should ever underestimate the difference that in particular might make. I've always thought that could be one of the real major impacts of the TIE campaign, is actually achieving something like visibility for LGBT and other groups in an education system that, for all the talk of social justice and all that kind of stuff, and it really hasn't been especially good at that up until now.
That's interesting, and the is interesting because relating back to some previous speakers, is that one of the challenges that people feel that TIE might face is how to almost like quality assure that meaningful classes with LGBT inclusive education are being taught. We had one speaker in earlier that was like, what their school regarded as an introduction to transgender people was they were told to research Caitlyn Jenner, just as a sort of one-off, and it felt very much like a tick in the box. Job done. That's me covered. Transgender people, and it's more of a what would you have an idea of how you could almost like quality assure that your own teaching is meeting the standards that TIE are looking at? I know that's quite a heavy question.
Yeah, it is a heavy question for 10 on a Sunday morning. I think one of the ways is obviously that the model that you were talking about of training people to then be able to go and train other people. So that sort of approach to the structure of how you're going to or how you're sort of organising the TIE campaign will help, because ultimately what you're aiming for is just starting with a very small number, and then gradually you have more and more people in more and more areas of the country. So you maybe need to worry a little bit less about viewing it as a quality assurance process. I think the thing for me that I would be wanting to keep an eye on, at least in the early stages, would be, and it's in the same kind of vein, I suppose, these sorts of issues being treated as you're sort of getting at there with a sort of tick box thing. LGBT is a big thing in education now, so we're going to have a half day where, or a full day in classes where in English classes we only deal with LGBT poets and writers. Well, I'll give you a bit of an immediate impact, but I think the thing to do genuinely is proper curricular, proper embedding in the curriculum. Which means that you need it to not be a surprising or a big sort of set piece thing when, for example, a piece of literature comes up in an English class that has been written by an LGBT author, and the fact that they're LGBT is something that you need to understand in order to fully understand the piece of work that they've done. It would be the same for history classes. It could be the same looking at a fairly broad range of science classes, I suspect, as well. Obviously, our NPS. So I think actually not so much a kind of quality assurance of how do we check each individual thing that's being done is perfect, because it simply is not going to be.
Yeah.
And Scottish education doesn't really work on a sort of command and control centralised model. And there's no reason to introduce one, because it wouldn't be beneficial. But I think the goal needs to be, while at first there are going to be issues with the odd bit that's a bit piecemeal and a bit ticky boxy, I think the goal needs to be to make sure that the TIE campaign is supported to keep on doing what it's doing, to keep expanding, to keep on raising the profile, to keep doing more work with groups like Education Scotland, to have every politician in the Parliament turning out, supporting them. I think if you do that, then gradually what will happen is that embedding LGBT issues into the broad sweep of the curriculum will stop becoming a thing that you have to worry about it being a tick box thing, and it just becomes, as it should always have been, it just becomes part of what we teach. It just becomes what happens in schools, that this is a way to make sure that all these different kinds of groups are actually visible. Because for the kids in schools, for example, for LGBT kids in school, I can't imagine how important it must be to be able to see LGBT people in the stuff that they're being taught. But even for everybody else as well, it's important for everyone in society. It's important for straight kids as well as LGBT kids to properly understand the society they live in and the people that live in it with them. So that I've always thought from the sort of the start of the TIE campaign, when they were talking to me about it, that was I think that's the goal. I think that's the big goal at the end. A fully embedded LGBT inclusive curriculum would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, and it actually leads on to my next point. The previous speaker just before yourself was Jamie Shimkowiak, and we were talking about how there's a certain aspect of Scottish culture to some degree, and I dare say in the sort of wider English speaking world as well. But it starts off in sort of S1 and S3, and you're describing things as gay in a derogatory way. And I was actually wondering, because you're an author and you've published Personal Impressions of Modern Scotland. I was wondering if there's maybe any sort of like faucets of Scottish culture that you think that there's almost ties addressing this, and it could form a sort of culture change in Scotland if we're beginning to start to teach inclusivity in the LGBT front from a young age.
Yeah, Scotland. So there's lots and lots of really great, really interesting, radical history in Scotland. But I always think that really fundamentally Scotland's a pretty conservative country. There are some big radical things that have happened. There are some amazing things that have happened in Scotland through history, obviously. But I think even now, I think deep down Scotland is a fairly conservative, small c conservative, obviously, but
of course.
a fairly conservative place, and it makes it difficult to affect significant change in a country where it really shouldn't be all that difficult. Like, there's only 5 million folk, and there's not even, is it, well, 5 million folk in this country. There's not a lot of us. It's not very big. Everyone knows everybody. It shouldn't be difficult to change things in a country the size of Scotland. It certainly shouldn't be anything like as difficult as it often seems to be across a whole range of political and social issues. The difference that the TIE campaign has made already, and could potentially make over the next say 3 to 5 years, could be a catalyst for shaking that up a bit. Because the thing about changing something in schools is that it's not just that you're affecting all the individual pupils in the schools, but actually education in Scotland is still, even before your Nicola Sturgeon's judge me on my record stuff, education is right at the absolute forefront of how Scotland sees itself. It's right at the forefront of politics in this country. It's another area that has been affected quite badly at times by that small c conservatism. If the TIE campaign, I know they've got commitments to do all of this, but if the TIE campaign can really make these sorts of big structural fundamental changes that we're talking about in the education system, I could see that being a catalyst for all sorts of other kinds of changes. And I think I've made this point before about TIE, that they've shown other people, they've shown other groups, other campaigners, other communities, that these sorts of changes are possible. Like what TIE has done already should have been impossible. You know, if you look at the history of Scottish education, if you look at sort of where society was, if you look at the political state of play when they first appeared, everything that TIE pulled off is absolutely extraordinary. They've done something that, as I say, by all rights should have been impossible. And if they can do that on this issue, then I would like to believe that it perhaps becomes either a model, but at least an inspiration for other sorts of changes that would need to be, you know, led by individual communities or led by sort of really committed campaign groups. But it's possible, and there's big things that we could and should change in Scottish society. If TIE happens to be one of the catalysts for that, then not only will they have done something extraordinary for Scottish education and therefore for every single young person in the country, but they could also potentially have done something really, really valuable for broader Scottish society. And that would be huge, and what a time to do it as well, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's the absolute right time to do it. You know, we've sort of chucked about it's 2019. We should have already done this. And you know, again, previous speakers have pointed out, he was like, yeah, well, we need to actually step up our game a bit and do it.
Yes,
you know, it's all good talking about it, but
yeah,
we need to do it.
Scotland has a very, as I say, Scotland's got some marvellous radical history, but is also, I think, sort of paradoxically, inherently quite conservative. But one of the things maybe just now, and partly it's because of issues around sort of independence from the UK, what that means for how some people see Scotland or feel they have to see Scotland in relation to other places. Scotland's very, very good at telling itself how good it is. And part of the reason that happens just now is because of the kind of political thing. If you're trying to, for example, maintain support for a second referendum or for independence, well, part of the way that, you know, I think you have to do that, and that, you know, people have been doing that, is by maintaining this kind of like, you know, positive story of a nation kind of idea. And that's fine, and I suspect happens pretty much everywhere. But when it gets to the point where it gets in the way of you actually fixing the things that need fixed because you're so keen on telling yourself how wonderful everything is that you can't see them, then it becomes a big problem. I mean, you wonder maybe if part of that was the issue. You know, Section 28 gets repealed and everyone pats himself on the back about this, in which it was this huge achievement of the first sitting of the new Scottish Parliament, and that was great. And there we go, we've solved this problem, you know. Because we want to tell ourselves about how forward-thinking and radical and engaged we were, when in actual fact what we did was we took away a horrific bit of legislation and then did absolutely nothing really to address the consequences of that legislation. It seems that we kind of thought that by getting rid of a few legal words on a bill kind of thing, you know, that would change things. And that was absolutely not the case. So I think getting better at accepting that as much as Scotland has a lot to offer, there's also an awful lot we'd like to change, would be a very, very good thing for everyone. And again, if that's something that TIE can help people to actually talk about, you know, then that's good for Scotland socially, and it's good for Scotland politically as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I completely agree. I always say, of course, I'm running a blog called AyeforScotland, so it's fairly obvious what way I'm leaning. But, you know, it's always like, you know, whenever I post something positive about Scotland, and, you know, there's quite a lot to be said, you know, with regards to renewable energy and, you know, like champion various rights and whatnot. But the one thing I always like to sort of add to it is, you know, we've still got work to do. Like it doesn't stop. It's sort of, you know, it's a process. It's not a destination. And I think, I mean, it's good in a way that, you know, when I did get a wee bit too happy clappy when it came to, you know, celebrating Scotland, that people sort of said, well, hold on a second, because, you know, it's not like racism doesn't exist in Scotland, you know.
Aye, exactly, yeah.
And there's a you know, there's a whole raft of you know, various education, not just on the LGBT side, but, you know, like colonial past and stuff that, you know, Scotland needs to get better at addressing. I think we're getting slightly better at it, but, you know, we need to change that as well.
I think we're getting there. As you said, the colonial past, like, you know, Scotland's slave history is a very, very good one. You've still got a lot of people who believe that, you know, Scotland was a victim of empire and that was all, which is just absolute madness, you know. So there are lots and lots of different social issues that we need to get an awful lot better at being honest with ourselves about if we're ever going to really improve things. You don't improve things by sticking your head in the sand. I think that in 10 or 15 years, it's entirely possible that we will be looking back at what the TIE campaign achieved in an extraordinarily short amount of time and seeing it as one of the significant catalysts for a much, much better country later on. Now, that's obviously assuming we're in a better country later on, that everything hasn't fallen apart, which it may well do. But let's say for argument's sake, kind of thought experiment, in 15, 20 years' time, if Scotland has found a way to make itself a fairer, more welcoming country, a country where everybody feels that they are genuinely welcome, everybody feels that they are represented, right across the board, whether we're talking about, identity issues, political issues, or whatever it happens to be. I think if that's the case in 15 or 20 years' time, I think we'll be sitting talking about the fact that the TIE campaign was one of the major catalysts for it. I think there's no doubt in my mind that assuming Scotland ends up where people like you and I would want it to in these kind of 15, 20 years, that is a better country. Yeah. I think one of the things that will have made it a better country is the success of the TIE campaign.
Brilliant. And I will ask the one last question that I've kind of asked everyone. But if you we're talking positively about Scotland 15, 20 years down the line, and the amazing thing of the TIE campaign is that this isn't just sort of like off the cuff. We're trying to train teachers. They've almost delivered the framework and the correct approach when getting different people on board, getting the Scottish Government on board, all that sort of stuff. So now, I'm not saying that the Scottish TIE group are going to be the ones expanding and making it some sort of global company, but in terms of inspiring other movements, and having other movements learn from what the TIE campaign, how they're actually doing this, would you say that there's the potential to spread this further than just Scotland's borders?
Oh, in terms of inclusive education?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've spoken to people in a couple of different educators in different countries kind of look at this and think it sounds incredible. I don't doubt for a second that we'll start to see essentially sort of internationalized versions of the TIE campaign over the next few years, because as much as I'm saying that we need to get better at talking about the issue problems in Scotland, etc., I don't think Scotland's lack of LGBT inclusive education was or has been or is uniquely bad. There's an awful lot of potential for what TIE has done, which is, as you say, sort of taking this thing about actually putting or making teachers comfortable with having conversations, putting them in places where they really examine the experiences of marginalised pupils in their classes. And the other thing is, centering the campaigns around the experiences of those young people. It's been massively successful in Scotland, and yeah, there are some advantages in Scotland. As I say, fairly small country, education at the top of the agenda at the point when they started their campaign, which maybe got them a bit of a boost. But there's no reason the same things couldn't happen in other countries. And actually, there's a relatively strong moral argument, I would have said, not just for kind of hoping that this happens in other countries, but where possible, actually trying to support organisations in other countries who are trying to build on TIE's campaign successes, but in their own contexts. And it'd be great to see that. That'd be a wonderful thing to be happening at the start of the 21st century, if that's one of the big changes that we start to see across more than just our country, but across the world. It'd be absolutely marvellous. And again, down to an amazing campaign run by a couple of folk who kind of got together sort of by chance. It's a remarkable story.
It absolutely is, and it's just something that we're keen to support. And I would love to say thank you very much for coming on and taking the time out of a Sunday morning and of all things.
Well, thanks for having me. I think what you're doing is brilliant, by the way. I'm sure your brain must be kind of slowly melting inside your skull at this stage. What are you 17 hours.
Yeah, it was about 6 o'clock this morning that I was like, how many hours do we have left?
But
yeah, but we're doing okay. We're at 10 o'clock, well, 10 past 10 just now. We're moving swiftly on, and we've got a few more speakers before the end of the day. So hopefully that'll keep things lively, because I'm rubbish at this game that I'm trying to play. So it's nice for speakers to break things up.
Been watching me bits of the game. It looks frustrating. Yes.
Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare. Those snakes are a nightmare. No worries. Anyway, thank you very much for that, and I'll chat to you soon.
No bother. Thank you very much for having me. Good luck.
Yep. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.